Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth alumni masterclass on emerging paradigms in biological research and career by Dr. Yogesh Goyal. He graduated from IIT Gandhinagar in 2012 with a BTech in chemical engineering. Currently, he's a postdoctoral fellow at University of Pennsylvania. Yogesh did much of his schooling in Jammu and Kashmir. After graduating from IIT Gandhinagar, he went to Princeton University to do his PhD, and he received his PhD from Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering and the Louis Singler Institute of Integrative Genomics under the joint mentorship of Stanislav Schwartzman and Trudy Schupbach. Yogesh then went to UPenn bioengineering to work with Arjun Raj. Over the years, Yogesh has won many prestigious awards, including the Burrow Wellcome Fund Award, Jane Coffin Child Fellowship, Schmidt Science Fellowship, William Schallwalter Travel Fund, and Sir Gordon Wu Fellowship. As an undergraduate at IITGN, Yogesh received the award for outstanding research. I had the opportunity to teach Yogesh, while he was at IIT Gandhinagar. I vividly remember he being a passionate basketball player, and he actually published a few research papers while he was pursuing his undergraduate program at IIT Gandhinagar. Yogesh, welcome to Alumni Masterclass. Thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. And I mean, there is nothing more, it's nothing that brings so much joy and proud to someone who is giving a talk at the place they did their undergrad. So I'm extremely happy to be here. Maybe I will just switch on my screen sharing mode so I have some slides. I changed the title a little bit just so we can talk about my different interests right now, which include not just studying science, but also thinking of art and how science and art are the same thing, and everything that we do is something in between. So to begin with, I thought I will quickly go over my journey, first personal and then a little bit about career, because I think some students might be interested in just knowing how different trajectories lead to the kind of career I'm pursuing right now. So to begin with, as Jason said, I was born and brought up in rural Jammu and Kashmir. As you can see this picture on the top, my family's original hometown is in Rajasthan, so I would go occasionally in summers to Rajasthan to just visit my grandparents and other people. So it was a very countryside experience for me growing up. Then I came to IIT Gandhinagar, as Jason was just saying, that I used to play a lot of basketball. And in fact, since we were the pioneers or the first batch, most of the things that we did were for the first time that was done at IIT Gandhinagar. So on the top, you are seeing the first basketball team that ever played for IIT Gandhinagar. And at the bottom, you can see the first convocation where I'm seen pictured with my some of my best friends from that time. As you can also see on the right, there is this young Jason from many years ago who used to travel with the team for basketball, and he also taught us a couple of courses which we really enjoyed. From there, once I graduated from IIT Gandhinagar, I went to Princeton to do my PhD. On the top, you're looking at the path that I used to take to work, and on the bottom, you're looking at the building I used to work in for 5 years of my PhD, which I finished at the end of 2017. After that, I went to Philadelphia, which is not too far away from Princeton. It's about an hour drive, and I joined University of Pennsylvania for my postdoctoral research And this is the first picture I took when I came to Philadelphia. So it's kind of a nice picture and memory that brings me back to the first week or so in the city. Also, one of the first times I was living actually in the city, a very different experience from living not in a city, as many of you would know. Uh, uh, Over the time, in the last 2 years, I have had the opportunity to also visit Oxford University as a part of Schmidt Science Fellow, which is a fellowship by Rhodes Trust. And I also had the opportunity to give a TED kind of talk there. So there's a lot of exciting things happening in my professional life, which is a good segue to get into my professional career quickly, and then we'll go on to talk a little bit about my research. 1 second. So I was a typical first year undergraduate student at IIT Gandhinagar, where you come in and you're like, oh, I'm going to make my CV. I'm going to be a manager in a cultural festival. I'm going to play all kind of sports, be the captain, have all the bullet points ready to make an MBA kind of CV. So I literally just spend most of my time doing that. But at the end of the summer, at the start of the summer, when the first year ended, I got an opportunity to do a summer research internship at IIT Bombay. Although I wouldn't call it like extremely research intensive, but the first experience of just working with playing around with the chemicals and a few things here and there made me think, oh, it's not bad. I kind of like it. And this is also a good point for me to acknowledge one of the most important people in my life, Professor SLN Murthy, who was actually the one who arranged this internship for me and inspired me to give it a chance, because obviously he could see that I was mostly interested in doing an MBA, get a CV for some IIM or some school here in the US. But his belief that I should at least try something at research, or even if I don't pursue it, was one of the most important things that I managed to do, and I'm very grateful to him. And then I came back. I think I distinctly remember my approach to studies at IIT Gandhinagar from first year to second year. In first year, I would spend a lot of time just not really studying much. As I said, taking care of a lot of managerial things. But I distinctly remember I became much more serious. And IIT Gandhinagar also had a lot of very young and enthusiastic professors who really wanted to for people to take part in discussions, and also maybe like now that I've seen so many professors teach old and young, I feel like having young professors really help you get a little bit more excited, because they want to try harder for people to get excited. So we had Professor Nitin, Samir, Chinmay, Kalyan Gain at that time. So I spent a lot of time just learning core concepts in chemical engineering, I would say fairly seriously. And after that, the next summer, I got an internship at Washington University in St. Louis, where I worked on a completely different problem, where I was doing a lot of data analysis. Some would call it data science or machine learning at present, but at those times, those words were not popular. But I got exposed to a completely new dimension of research, which I really enjoyed, partly also because I realized I am not terrible at it and I don't feel bothered doing it. So that was a great time. Then I came back to IIT Gandhinagar in 2010 at the end of the summer, and I joined Professor Kalyan Gain's lab, who was then at IIT Gandhinagar, and we were doing a lot of studies on how to get different chemical products when you start from different initial raw materials. And that was also a very enriching experience. Also, I must point out here that one of the most important things, in my opinion, in your life is to meet mentors who are inspiring, and they really define what you do in your career. And as I said earlier, I was very fortunate to have Professor Murthy, who is basically like a second father figure to me, and Professor Gayan also was very patient and really wanted me to get the experience that I should get before I start my PhD. So he was very careful with everything and wanted to treat me like an adult, but at the same time also be understanding of my limitations and lack of hard work sometimes. So I'm really grateful for these mentors. Whoops, what happened? Okay. After that, at Princeton, I completely switched gears. So I did go to Princeton thinking that I will, coming back to this point about plant scale modeling, there were a couple of very accomplished professors at Princeton who did plant scale optimizations, and I thought I'll join one of those labs. But when I came here, I really enjoyed just interacting and attending classes in biology, like real hardcore biology. And I ended up studying what we call as animal development. I was really fascinated by thinking about how do we all go from a small single cell to a fully developed animal with 2 eyes, 1 nose, so on and so forth, and how this process goes right so often. It's just remarkable, because think about making a building or a bridge. How often do these things don't work out, or how often does it take months, if not years, to make? Animal development, or how we develop, is infinitely more complex, in quite literal sense, infinitely more complex, but it happens so fast. You have a fully grown baby by 9 months and an adult which keeps on developing in various ways. So it's very fascinating to me, and that was my PhD topic. On the left, you are seeing a picture of eggs that a fly lays, a fruit fly. A fruit fly is a fly which you can see on bananas, like small, little annoying flies. And so there are many eggs in this picture. Each little, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but each little thing is 1 egg, and it's like an assembly line, like when you go to a car factory or any factory, there's assembly lines where each part over time is like just processed on a conveyor belt, so as to speak. So the same process happens in animal development in many cases, where there are many eggs waiting in line. So the first one goes out, then the second one goes out, then the third one, and then it develops into a fully fledged flies. Where I came in was because my background is in engineering and a little bit of applied math. We were looking at this whole development process from a very quantitative perspective. What I mean by that is that instead of just looking at what is going on and describing things, my work was a lot related to measuring things and measuring it well, so that we can find things which were either subtle or not obvious by just descriptions. And I had a great time doing my PhD, because although the first few years were very challenging, because I was not a student of biology, so a lot of very basic things took a long time to understand. But once I got a grasp of those things, to some extent, I really had a great time. And again, the mentors I had here, both of them, Sas and Trudy, extremely generous and kind people, and it really helped me going. More importantly, looking back, if you don't know me, people would just say that, oh, you had a great PhD, maybe that also helped you go to academia. I don't think that is the reason, because I did have a great PhD in terms of publishing, but the reason I'm in academia is because of these 2 professors who really made me feel that it is a fun process and it was not done just to be successful, but to enjoy it. So that was one of the other shifts I felt in my career, and something that has left a profound impact on me, that I should not do things just because I'm good at them, but because I'm enjoying them, and it means something more than just a CV point for me. So taking that inspiration, I joined University of Pennsylvania to study another completely different topic. I pivoted quite strongly here again, where going from studying development, I started getting interested in studying how do cancer cells behave when you get cancer. Also, more specifically, how do cancer cells behave when you treat them with therapy drugs? So with this, and I thought that instead of talking more broadly about many different areas that I've worked on, I thought I'll focus on one area so that there is a strong concept or a new concept, which I think is a new concept that people take away from this. And my hope is that I can communicate it well. So with this, I'm going to segue into just talking about my more recent work, because my rest of the work is published. A lot of this new work is not published, but hopefully in the next few months, a lot of it will be up for publication. So starting with this, I will I will go into some details. I've still tried to make it not very technical, so please feel free to ask questions maybe at the very end. I'm also happy to take it now. I don't know with Zoom what is best, but I'm pretty happy either way. So the main idea behind my whole project is that when people think of cancer, it's not an average product. What I mean by that is, let's say you have a basketball team of 5 people, or you're starting 5, and some are very tall and some are short. You can't just say that the average height of my team is 5'8". You have to talk about which one is taller because they have a specific role, which one is shorter, they have a different role, or physique wise. So it is a single cell process. That's a very important concept that I want to you to take away from this little description of my work, where not every cell is the same, and when you add drugs to cancer cells, different cells behave differently. And we will come to this topic of looking at everything at a single cell resolution all the time, and I'll show you why that is important. Okay, so human body is comprised of trillions and trillions of cells, as I said earlier, which make up different tissues. There are cells that specialize in building muscles, those that specialize in making skin, so on and so forth. All these cells are constantly undergoing extremely complex processes, and they're all done with exquisite precision and accuracy. However, there are many factors, both environmental, for example, getting COVID, or getting some flu or sneeze or cold, or there are genetic mutations which are within your body, which can derail the normal process, which makes you sick and leading to diseases. For example, cancer, it is right now the second leading cause of death globally, and according to American Cancer Society, it accounts for about 1 in 6 deaths across the whole world, which is more than HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria all combined. Now, these numbers are expected to increase substantially in the next 20 years as the world is living longer, and there are a lot of other factors that are contributing to it. What this means is that a large proportion of people in this room, pretty much everyone in this room, will either be directly affected by the disease or will know someone who is affected by this disease. So it is a disease of the future, unfortunately. And unsurprisingly, given the modern advancement in technology, there are countless number of and different types of treatments that have been proposed or developed to tackle this disease, and many are still many of the efforts are still underway to tackle this disease. I don't know how many of you have read this beautiful book by Siddharth Mukherjee, who talks about cancer as not just one disease, but hundreds and thousands of diseases in one umbrella term. So that makes the process much more challenging, because it's one thing doesn't work for everyone. Now, fortunately, over the years, we have become extremely good at curing most of the cancer. And notice I use the word most. What do I mean by that? As you can see in this tumor, schematic of a tumor, by the end of a treatment, you get some cells left, but most of the tumor is gone. And this is where the problem starts. The next few slides will have some gory images, but I'll try to keep it short so that we can move on to more concepts rather than the medical terms and medical translational impact. But I think it's good for motivation. So what do I mean by most cells and not all cells? Take an example of a person with metastatic melanoma. You give them therapy, and within 3 months, the tumor is completely gone and the person is melanoma free. However, 6 months after the therapy has stopped, the tumor comes back, and worse, it is much more stronger and it cannot be treated with the same drug. So what is happening here? It is called the process of, so in common terms, it is called relapse, where the cancer goes away and then it comes back, and then it becomes resistant to the new drug. So this process of resistance is not new. It has been observed and found in pretty much every other disease that humans study, like tuberculosis, HIV, even coronavirus. There is some resistance that is already developing to some kind of peripheral treatments, although there's no FDA or there's no approved treatments per se. But resistance to different kind of treatments in cancer or otherwise presents a very important modern day challenge or roadblock in the development of effective therapeutics strategies. And just like most things in science, one of the first inspirations to how this process happens came from beautiful work almost 70 years ago by a physicist and a microbiologist. Again, notice that even back then there were strong interdisciplinary science which helped people understand what is going on. So they tried to study how do small bacteria, which are microorganisms, when they're attacked by virus, how do they learn to live? And they showed, using very beautiful experiments. I encourage some of you who is interested in just in general science to read some short summary of their experiments. Extremely beautiful and very ingenious experiments, which showed that when you add virus to a plate of bacteria, the bacteria that are able to develop resistance, it is because they have a random mutation in them, which allows them to survive better than some other bacteria. So you start with 1,000 bacterium cells, and you add some drugs or some virus to that plate of bacteria. Let's say most of them die, but some of them learn to survive. The ones that learn to survive had a random mutation in them before. This process is nothing but a consequence of Darwinian selection, the process of natural selection, which also happens in evolution of human beings. So often resistance is considered to have features of evolution as well. So this is one of the examples of what I just explained you. You can see there are 4. So this whole plate is full of bacteria, and then you put these which have been infected, and you put some of the antibiotics or some treatment. You can see in 3 of the 4 cases, the bacteria dies, but this 4th case, which is top right, you see that bacteria is already resistant to attacks from in this case synthetic drug. And as I said before, they showed that this happens because of something that Charles Darwin proposed many years ago, that some of these bacteria just randomly happen to have a mutation that help them survive better in drugs. Coming back to cancer, what is going on here? A large body of research has shown that, or have concluded that what is going on is that in the initial case, there was one or a few cells which had some random mutation in them, and once you added drug, most of the other cells died and very few survived. So you couldn't see the tumor per se, but over time, since these red cells in this case are not responding to drug, over time they just repopulate the tumor. Again, a process that has often been associated with Darwinian selection. And this process, this paradigm of Darwinian selection has been the dominant force in the study of cancer resistance and cancer in general in the last 22 decades. Partly also because the pace at which sequencing is being developed, and also the cost is coming down very fast. So people kept focusing on finding what mutations are leading to this behavior. Now, at the same time, clearly we have not been able to develop effective therapies which can ultimately and effectively eradicate the disease. Clearly, it means that there is an important link that is missing, because most therapies still develop resistance. So this is where I joined the current lab I'm in, where we wanted to see, can we find these rare cells, in this case, as you can see, a blue cell here, and take them out and measure them properly and with very high quantitative resolution. And these rare cells, when I say rare, they are extremely rare. So 1 in a few thousands, which makes it very challenging to find these cells because they are the ones that matter. The rest of them will likely die when you add drug. So more recently, in the last 5 to 6 years, I would say truly in the last couple of years, people have shown that cells which are identical to each other. So you start from a single cell, you let them divide for a little bit. So all of them are basically identical to each other and they don't have mutations. They display very interesting properties and they display behavior, what is called as non-genetic. So think of genetic and non-genetic as genetic being a permanent change in the system, because once you have a mutation, the mutation doesn't go back. Whereas non-genetic is something that happens inside the cell just because of constant fluctuations of how the cells are behaving in a different state. So what we found was that over time, if you look at this population of exactly the same cells, there are some cells which are constantly turning on and turning off. You can see here in blue that there is one cell that turns on a certain state, a non-genetic state, and then it turns off over time. So it's a reversible process. And more importantly, we found that the cell that is blue at the time of treatment is the one that is going to survive the drug treatment. So this is very fascinating because it is saying that you do not need a mutation to lead to survival. There are many other things that could be going on. And then, long story short, you see this in many patients as well. Since then, people have started to collect patient data and seeing that a lot of, it's not mutually exclusive, but it could be a combination of both mutation-driven resistance and non-mutation-driven resistance. So, as I said before, studying these blue cells or the cells that are very rare and they're going to become resistant is a very challenging process to study experimentally, because think of it as a hard problem, which is harder than finding a needle in a haystack, because in this case, a needle can become a hay and a hay can become a needle over time. So you really have to be at the right time, at the right place to pick up these cells to stop them. So to get around this problem, or not to get around, but to try to understand this process a little better, because clearly it's a very clinically relevant phenomena, I collaborated and worked with a very talented mathematician, Leah, who came from Germany and spent a year with us. And we used mathematical modeling to ask a very simple question. What are the minimum set of requirements that a cell need to enter this state and then go out of this state? This is an important question because since it has been discovered for the last 2, 3, 4 years, many interesting theories have been proposed that, oh, it is not possible to get this state without many complex processes, blah, blah, blah. And our model showed that you indeed do not need any complex process to lead to this state. And it can be described entirely by very simple mathematical model. And then we do some tests of these modeling to show that that is indeed the case, or at least it implies that that is the case, what we show. And to keep it simple, I'm happy to provide you with the exact paper, which just came out like 2 months ago, about what exactly we did. But this is a good point to emphasize how important it is to think and work at multi levels rather than just focus on one technique and one way of thinking. Like the student that came and worked with me for a year, she was a mathematician by training, a true mathematician, and I really enjoyed just learning new things from her. And we came up with this project together with Arjun. But it was a beautiful process, and we learned something exciting about the system. Now, switching gears a little bit to a little bit more about my main the other main project, so as to speak, but something that I've spent last 3 years already on it, and we are about to finish the story in the coming months. But so what happens is, once this blue cell survives, it then changes into something we call as a red cell, which just signifies that the blue cell undergoes some changes to be able to survive. And then it starts dividing again. A process that I showed you earlier, but I showed you in the context of Darwinian selection. Just to summarize this again so that everyone is on the same page, what we have shown in our lab and a few other labs have recently shown using very cool single cell technologies that it's not just the mutation that drive resistance. It can be a cell that is constantly, a different cell that are constantly fluctuating over time. And when you add drug, the cell that is blue or in that non-genetic state is the one that is going to survive the drug treatment and develop resistance. A process that we call as non-Darwinian paradigm of drug resistance. Now, when I joined the lab, I saw that I wanted to explore the features of these resistant populations, and there are quite literally 3 different possible scenarios that could exist. In one scenario, so you start from a single cell, you let them divide, you add drug, what happens? Is it that all the resistant cells that emerge are the same? Or is it that different cells that emerge are a mix of different types of cells? Or is it that the cells that survive have very distinct end states? And all of these have very strong and important implications on our understanding of drug resistance. For example, if the first one is the case, that means there is a single mechanism that is guiding drug resistance. If the last one is the case, it means there are many mechanisms which are guiding the resistance state. If the middle one is the outcome, that means that once they acquire resistance, they're still undergoing many changes. So it's a dynamic process. What I found was that the third one is the most likely case, where you see in the same plate of cells, you see these different morphologies and different looking cells, which, as you can see how close they are, it follows this criteria where, or it follows this third possible fate where one cell emerges resistant and then the other cells that come out of it are of the same kind. Similarly, in all of these 4 cases. Now, going beyond these qualitative descriptions, how can we systematically identify what are all the possible fates that emerge? An easy way, or I wouldn't say easy way, but a most natural way of thinking about it is you pick up individual or small cells from each of these different types of cell colonies, and then you do different kind of protein level or RNA level analysis on those cells. Now, that's a more classical approach, which requires you to manually pick up different things, and it is inherently biased. So you have a proclivity to only pick up certain things and not others. But more importantly, it cannot be scaled up. You can, in a day, pick up 10 colonies or 15 colonies, and that also is not pure, because often these different, so we call them colonies just to get the terminology right, but it's difficult to pick them up because often they're touching each other. Some cells move from here to there. So it's difficult to get an accurate answer, and also something that is not at scale. So like personally, I would hate to be the one picking up cells and making a statement even when I'm not sure it's not precise. So to get around this problem, I developed what I call as Fate Map, a technology that allows us to profile hundreds and thousands of such colonies in a single experiment in half a day. So how does it work? So we have these cells I showed you before. What I have developed is a way to barcode each of these cells uniquely. So just like a QR code, each cell in the population has a unique barcode that I can identify. Now, I'm showing here like 10 or 15 cells. We can go up to 20 million cells or 30 million cells and barcode each cell uniquely so that we can retrospectively identify these cells. Now, once we have barcoded these cells, we add drug to these barcoded cells. And as I showed you before, most of the cells die. Let's say a couple survive, and then they start dividing again. Now, because of this clever genetic engineering trick, what we can do is we can go back and see, okay, this colony has this one barcode which is common in all cells. This other colony, which is different, has a different barcode. And then what we can really do is mix all the colonies in a single plate without having to worry about keeping them separate, and do sequencing on them so that we can retrospectively identify exactly which cells come from which colonies. I think it's a very powerful approach, and it's already working for us. So right now I'm able to collect information on up to 1,000 colonies in a single experiment, and we already see very interesting patterns that some resistant colonies are very different from others, and in what way are they different. And going beyond this, you can even ask more interesting questions. For example, you combine all these barcoded cells and put them through some sort of cell Olympics, where you can see that which colonies or which type of cells that emerge are better at, let's say, migration, because that is a very important behavior that cancer cells exhibit that can lead to metastasis or invasion to different tissues. Or how well do they grow and survive? So we can put these cells through different tests and collect the barcodes that win in each of the scenarios and assign true function to different colonies that emerge. And that's not it. Another very interesting and very powerful thing about this system is that unlike manual isolation, where you individually pick up colonies, once you pick up the colony, it's dead. You cannot go back in time. With my barcoding technique, what we can ask is, what happened to the initial cell? Is it that the initial cell that was blue, the same blue cell goes to 3 different end states, such that diversity can arise just because of the action of the drug? Or is it that the blue cell was not exactly blue, but a different shade of blue or a slightly different state, such that those states are amplified and then they become very different at the end? Or yet, is there some sort of canalization, a concept which in math we call as many-to-one function, where you can think of maybe 2 cells which were before drug almost similar but not quite. When you added drug to them, they end up in the same state, whereas a different cell was destined for a different end state. Because I have these barcoded cells, and using a clever technique of letting them divide once and then adding drug, we can see where do the sister cells end up going. And from what we see so far, this third case is the most common scenario, where there are some sister cells or cells that are just divided end up in the same endpoint, and then there are some cells which definitely go to a completely different endpoint. So we are really beginning to ask very basic questions about what is the origin of this diversity, and that holds the key to finding the appropriate cocktail of inhibitors that we can add to ultimately cure the disease. Now, we can also begin to ask a little bit more philosophical question: is this diversity needed? That is, are some cases of resistant population better at tumor-related properties than others, and it's like a winner-take-all situation, as shown in right? Or is it that it's a divide and conquer, where you are trying to divide your labor, division of labor, where some cells are doing the job of invading, some cells are doing the job of growing the tumor, and so on and so forth. So I'm very excited to think about these questions over time. And as I said before, I try to combine my work with art, and recently I worked with an artist to represent this whole behavior in terms of an art form, and I'm very excited about it, so I wanted to just go over with it with you guys. So basically, this is a runner which captures the time aspect of the process, because it's a still image, and this person with the initial horn to start the race is sort of like drug treatment. So we see that once the race starts, or over time, most of the cells die, and then a couple of them survive, and then they start developing new cells again. So I think of how to combine art. I talk to artists a lot, and we have some active ongoing collaborations going on. I'm very excited to just hear your guys' thought about this whole thing, and if you have ideas to collaborate or just think together, I'm always excited about it. And with this, I think I'll be finishing in a minute, in 30 seconds. I also wanted to say that probably works best if we go through things or questions about career or research and ideas about research over back and forth question and answer session. And this is the last slide I have. On the left is my graduation photo with my parents who were there when I defended my PhD, and my 2 advisors who have been, as I said, extremely instrumental in making me who I am. And also my funding agencies, which I've been very fortunate to get recently. It allows me to do a lot of things without having to ask anyone, quite literally independent of anyone. So it has been a welcome thing. How to contact me? I have a website which has my email ID, but I also have my email ID here. Feel free to contact me for any kind of questions. I also have a Twitter account, which I don't post actively, but I open it quite actively to follow research and other things. So feel free to contact me there as well. And with this, I think I'm going to stop here. One last thing I will say, and this is something I've noticed a little bit more growing up in India, is, and also just education in India, I think biology as a research is often thought of maybe not at as exciting or as at par with let's say computer science or other engineering things. What I found very fascinated by since I've been doing my PhD is there's so many engineers, so many physicists, so many computer scientists. Just everyone is excited about biology because we see an opportunity to think about hard problems, extremely hard problems in a very interdisciplinary sense. So if you're an engineer thinking, oh, biology is not for me, I strongly recommend that you give it a chance and see the exciting things that biologists are doing together with mathematicians, physicists, and engineers. And I would think that I'm one of the examples where I never did biology before, and now I just love it because you just start seeing things differently, and there's a lot to be done in this field. So feel free to ask me questions about that as well. With this, I will stop. Yep.